Throughout my life, I've had the opportunity to meet a few famous people. You can scroll down my anchor page there and read my podcast about meeting people like Julia Roberts and Frank Sinatra and Elvis Presley. But today I'm going to talk about meeting Wilt Chamberlain. Now, for the rare person who may not know who Wilt Chamberlain was, probably one of the greatest basketball players who ever lived. He holds a record that probably will never be broken in basketball. He scored 100 points in one game. He played for the Philadelphia Warriors before they became the Philadelphia 76ers. And then he went on to play with the Los Angeles Lakers. But somewhere around, I kind of forget the years, but somewhere around when I graduated high school in 1965, give or take a few years, I forget whether they were still the Philadelphia 76ers or they had then they were still the Philadelphia Warriors, or if they had become the Philadelphia 76ers. But either way, Wilt Chamberlain was playing during those years for Philadelphia. And my friend in high school was a guy who was actually co-captain of the basketball team in high school. And his father was once played for the Philadelphia Warriors, going back many years. And during this time period, somewhere around those years, my friend's father had now retired from playing basketball, but he was now the general manager of the Philadelphia basketball team. So one day he said, "You want to come down and watch the game? I'll get you to you can sit right behind the bench." And so we're like totally excited, like overjoyed. So we go down to the game. And we get to sit kind of right behind the bench of the Philadelphia basketball team. And during halftime, his father comes up to us and says, "How would you like to meet Wilt?" Well, duh, yeah. So we're like, the whole second half, we didn't even pay much attention to the game. We couldn't wait to meet Wilt. We were just so excited to actually meet Wilt. So sure enough, after the game, his father walks over and, oh my God, it was like, a giant just coming up in front of you. I remember Wilt standing right in front of me, and I'm actually looking at his chest. Because he was like, I think 7'2", and I don't know, I think at the time maybe I was 5'5" or 5'6". And I'm like staring at his chest. And one of the things I remember, I'm like, so not only shaken and excited, but this guy was just a monster standing in front of me and my friend. So anyway, he extends his hand, and I go to shake his hand. And I'm not kidding you. My hand literally disappears in his hand, including the wrist. You couldn't even see my wrist. His hands were so gigantic. My whole hand and my wrist just disappeared. And he squeezed my hand, and I'm sure he wasn't trying to squeeze hard, but he was squeezing kind of gentle. But I thought my hand was in a vice. But I wasn't going to say anything about it. I just kept smiling, but I just so remember that moment when my hand just completely, and my wrist just completely disappeared. His hands were so large. Now, for those of you who don't know, there's a very famous picture to show you how strong Wilt was and how big his hands were. There was a famous picture, you can go online and find it, of him palming. For those of you who don't know what palming is, that's holding a basketball in one hand at the top and just holding it with your palm with one hand. He was palming in his photo 2 16-pound bowling balls without his fingers in the holes. That's how strong he was and how big his hands was. He was just a phenomenal player, and like I said, one of his records will probably never be broken, 100 points in one game. That's kind of unheard of. But that was one of the fond memories of that period of my life, is actually getting to meet Wilt Chamberlain. So that is a memory I will treasure forever. Thanks for listening. Listen to some of my other podcasts if you want to see some of the other famous people I've met and my experience with them. So thanks again for listening.